Good evening and welcome to Speaker's Corner UK channel. It's been a while since we've done our last review, and we're back tonight, as the title says, a review of James S.C., his omniscience versus free will argument that he presented to the Muslim live stream called The Arena. The link is in the description if you want to go watch the entire thing. It starts around 1 hour and 11 minutes and 33 seconds. And so that's where we're going to start today with this. And of course, as always, I welcome my co-host for these reviews, Stops. Good evening, sir. How are you?
Hi, welcome. I'm great. And yourself?
Yeah, pretty good. Good weather out here. This is about a half hour, so settle yourselves in. It's probably going to be a 2-hour review, something like that. Maybe it's quicker, but you never know. You never know how long these things take. Oftentimes there's so many things to say, and it's hard to know when not to say something. So settle in for a couple of hours with us, and we'll see how we get on.
Okay.
Strap in, enjoy the flight. Yeah. Any other first words before we get straight into it?
No. This is something I've watched bits and pieces, but not the entire thing. I just remember that he was like complimented out very quickly when it's sort of okay. We'll take a look what happened.
Cool. Okay. On that note, and I did have here, which I'll keep ready for us, is the actual argument in words. So I wonder if before I actually start, I thought I had this up already, but what I'll do is just pop this into, I don't know where I can put this actually. I'll pop it into the side chat, Stops, and if you can put that into a document as we chat, and maybe we can bring it up on screen. Oh, that's it. So is that the whole thing? Yeah, that's the whole thing. As far as I can, is it? Just checking. You guys can't see that. I apologize. Maybe there's also a limit to the size.
3.
No, that's not the whole. There should be 6
there's something
points
missing.
It's not copying it all for some reason, or maybe there might be a limit in the private chat there. So I'll ping it to you. I'll ping it to you on Skype, and you can just copy and paste that into a document, and we can bring that up for people to look at. Okay, brilliant. With that said, let us get straight on into this review. Let me share the screen, and also just watch the comments as well. That'll be entertaining as well, and perhaps educational as you see the comments going here. See if you can pick out anything that's substantive from the comments on the side there. Here we go.
Here we go. Happening, game.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. I think I'm overly complimented you, man.
This is the hell kind of more organized.
I was expecting Brad Pitt or something to jump in here right now.
This is not the James I thought you were talking about, because there's an Indian James that puts on a suit and brushes his hair and comes on. Right?
Oh, no, there's only one James SC.
Thanks, Hamza, for your kind words.
No problem.
So I know I'll give an argument, premise by premise, and I have a feeling that maybe Yusuf might want to comment on it. But here it goes. So
so Stops, when you got a chance, obviously just share your screen. We'll bring the argument up on the screen here. We're not going to keep it up the whole time. So if you're watching this in review, you can obviously pause it, have a look at the argument. He's going to run through an argument now for why, at least some Muslim conceptions of free will and omniscience are not compatible. So he's going to run through this now. We'll bring it up on screen hopefully shortly, and then you can always pause and come back to it. But also notice here,
can you see
I think
this?
one thing that Jake, there we go, that's brilliant. Yeah, so there it is on screen for you. So maybe take a screenshot, or you can always come back to it. That's near the beginning of the live stream that we're doing now. So that's the argument, in case you want to see the actual premises that James has laid out. There we go, nice and big there. And that's what he's going to read through. But also notice James did something really well there. He selected a panel member that he wants to, engage with. And I think this is crucial, right? As you can see, you can't see it at the moment because we've got this up on screen. But when we do come back to my picture in a moment. So we'll swap over. We'll come back to this again if we need to. So Stops will keep it up there. I'm just going to replace it now with this one.
Yep.
But you can always go back and have a look at that if you need to. But James will read it out now. But he's selected Yusuf Ponders, right, the guy in the top right-hand corner. And I think this is really key. When you have 5 Muslims on, you don't want to talk to all of them. And you don't want to select the simpletons, the people who really are not going to respond to your argument in any way. And, probably if anything, Ijaz and maybe Yusuf ponders are the two that you'd select here, if anything, right? And so that was a really good thing from him. Hey, Yusuf, I'd like to present this to you. Now, the other guys are going to jump in anyway, but at least you set the scene in the beginning that that's who you most likely want to speak to. So here we go. James is now going to read out this argument that he's bringing to them.
So, number one.
No, you can't do both.
Yeah, put it up.
You can't listen to James and at the same time this.
We have to hear your claim first.
My
and then you
apologies.
can break it down as to why.
So we'll have to
my
go
apologies,
back.
of course. Yeah, okay, sorry about that. All right, yeah, sorry about that. I thought we could swap, but of course I need to pause it if he's doing that. So, yeah.
Although there's only one James SC. So we can only do what Allah knows we're going to do. Is that right?
Okay, sorry.
It goes. So, number one, Allah is all-knowing and all-powerful. Therefore, he has infallible knowledge of the future, which means he can't possibly be wrong. Number two.
Okay. Wait.
Okay.
We have to hear your claim first, and then you can break it down as to why you believe that thing is true. So,
Okay,
what is your,
Rob, just hang on a second.
your claim, and then we'll break that down.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so the conclusion.
Go ahead.
I don't understand why he's interrupting. Because you don't actually need to bring a claim first. You build it up. You go and you formulate your premises on which the claim is based. So the rational and reasonable thing to do is to go and say, okay, premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, premise 4, and therefore number 6, this is what this is what my claim is. You don't do it the other way around. The thing is, what they want to do, of course, is they want to go straight to the claim without listening to why he thinks he is claiming this. They don't need the context or anything. They want to hear the claim so that they can go and jump right in. So this is a tactic which is, I don't know. I don't even know why Yusuf is the one who's keeping quiet here and not reining in Hamza and telling him, no, we first need to know what the hell the context is. We need to understand what the premises are before we can go and listen to the claim. But everybody is keeping quiet and letting Hamza just steamroller over this, which I think is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, it is his show, and he does tend to do this, right? He thinks he's keeping everything in control, and he doesn't realize, and I think James said it in the beginning, but maybe he's not clear on what this is. James said, hey, I'm going to present this argument. I suppose the only thing one could say, and again, this is entirely subjective, and it's not as if James ought to do this, but what he could do potentially is say, hey, I'm going to bring you an argument now where, I think that God's omniscience or Allah's omniscience contradicts free will. And I'm going to read you these premises. So if you listen here, we'll come to that conclusion. That's what I'm building to. He could say that, but he did say in the beginning, hey, I'm going to present you this argument. Now, of course, Hamza, with very little patience, it tries to jump in, as you say, and try and get to the conclusion first. So either way, he could have told them what the argument is about, or i.e. what the conclusion is, or Hamza could have also just given them the patience to do so. But either way, we're going to get to, that you can't have omniscience and free will ultimately. But normally somebody will go, okay, make the argument, but I also would like to go, okay, what's the argument you're presenting? And somebody can just in one sentence summarize. I go, okay, that's what you're building to. But again, just have patience. It's not going to take long. James doesn't muck about with these sort of stuff. But I think Hamza's got very little patience, and mostly I think he doesn't really understand philosophical arguments anyway. And so for him, this is boring. And you'll see multiple times during this whole thing, he's going to want to kick James out here, and the other guys actually want to continue speaking, at least for a period of time.
Of the argument is that free will does not exist in Islam.
Oh, okay, that's good. That's a good one. So what you're saying, because Allah knows the future, and He knows all our actions, therefore we don't have choice in what we do because we can only do what Allah knows we're going to do. Is that right?
Basically.
Yeah, he feels this need to want to summarize it, and ultimately he doesn't summarize it as accurately as the interlocutor does, and it's a case of, do you know what? Rather let the panelists know. If somebody doesn't understand it, then maybe summarize it. But unfortunately, Hamza's got a track record of either straw manning it or misconstruing it or not representing it as accurately or strongly as the interlocutor who comes on. So it's a good idea for Hamza not to do this unless the person is long-winded or they have no clue what's going on, because it actually doesn't help. It detracts from this whole thing.
It's like
I'll let you actually. I'm going to let you break it now. Go on, I'll let you lead.
Right. Well, that's what you should have done from the beginning. Glad you realized that. Maybe that's a lesson for future.
Lead up to your big crescendo. Go on.
Okay. Thank you very much. So that was the first premise. Number 2, therefore, at every single point in time, Allah infallibly knows exactly what you'll do at that point in time. Number 3, therefore, at every single point in time, there is only one thing you can possibly do, which is the thing that Allah has foreseen, because if you did something different at that point in time, then Allah's knowledge would be fallible. 4, in order to have free will, it must be possible for you to choose between multiple options. Number 5, but we already established in 3 that at every point in time, there is only one thing you can possibly do. So at no point in time is it possible for you to choose between multiple options. And number 6, therefore, free will does not exist in Islam.
Yes, I disagree with. Can you repeat was it the third premise?
Yes, yeah. Number 3 was, therefore, at every point in time, there is only one thing you can possibly do, which is the thing that Allah has foreseen. If you did something different at that point in time, then Allah's knowledge would be fallible.
Right, so I disagree with that, because there isn't only the end or the result. So you have a moment in time when the choice arises, and you do have an option between A, B, C, D, ... Continue.
Okay, so that's a misunderstanding, right? Now Yusuf is thinking, okay, at the very end you can choose something, but he's saying when this idea arises, type thing, then you've got these choices. But the whole point that James is making, and he's going to reiterate it now, is that those are just illusions of choice. Those choices, it's like you're on a puppet on a string, and you think you've actually got the ability to do these things, but in fact you are being coerced to do it in ways that you are not aware of. So it's just an illusion of choice. There isn't actually, a choice there, and I think that's the key thing. So, and I'm sure James will, reiterate this again now.
And that is a moment distinct from the moment where you make the choice. Now, just because Allah has knowledge of the choice.
Okay, so he's trying to distinguish between when the choices come up in your mind and you make the choice. Okay, but it really doesn't matter. But the time that they come up in your mind is what we're talking about. Because if they come up in your mind and you don't have the freedom, in other words, you're buffeted or bombarded by things you have no control over, then it doesn't matter if you have control later. That's an idea called compatibilism. And a lot of people, find that view to be more palatable. Most people accept that there's determinism, i.e. that the cause and effect going back, to the beginning of the universe, for example, hasn't changed, and you are buffeted by this. You don't have any control over that cause and effect. But hey, if a choice comes from internally inside of you without some sort of outside coercion, well, then it's free. And that's a view that some people do hold. But James is specifically, I think, talking about the idea that in the very beginning here, you don't do that. Now, Yusuf is not clear. Maybe he doesn't know about compatibilism, but if he does, then he should state that, hey, this is what I am and that's what I mean. But even still, in this view, you don't have that choice is still an illusion, whether it's the one that entered your mind that you had no control over, or after you deliberated and you made a choice, having something already entered your mind. Even then, that's still not a free choice in the libertarian sense, i.e. that you're truly free to do that. You just think you are. It's all a big illusion because Allah knows best.
The choice that you've made, that doesn't negate the fact that there was a moment prior to that making of the choice where there were choices available. So it's not true that at any given moment, because Allah is also aware of the moment prior to you making the choice, and he's aware of the fact that you had an option of A, B, C, so on and so forth, and you could have picked any of them, and then he has knowledge of the moment after it where you've made your choice. I would disagree with that premise.
Yeah, I'll throw something in.
Sorry, did you want to say something there, Stops? I wasn't
Nope.
sure if it was you or one of them. Yeah, so that's obviously not the case, right? These choices that he supposedly, or that you have, is just an illusion, as I've explained. So the choice isn't real; it's just illusory, and that's what he's pointing to. But he thinks they are real choices that you can actually select A, B, C, for example. But if Allah's foreseen C, then A and B are simply illusions that give you the idea that, oh, I could have taken A or B, but in actual fact you couldn't. And that's the thing that I think James will hopefully, maybe in different words, but say the same sort of thing that I'm saying.
Putting in here what Dr. Imran said on one of our streams. It doesn't happen because it's written. It's written because it happened.
Okay, that's a distinction without a difference in my view. I don't see any difference to that. Whichever way, the source, the thing that got it writing, if you like. There we go, Stops. That's nice. Excellent.
Yeah,
You're just trying to, I know how to change that. Yeah, I know.
I don't know how to change you to second and me to first, but because I don't want this.
Try now. Yeah, so try it like this now. I don't know. There is a way where you highlight yourself and you make it into.
No, it's this one, but I cannot have both this, the screen, and me, and it always selects you, and this I don't know how to do.
Oh, there we go. There. No, I thought there's a way that you can click on like your little the little icon there that says solo layout, but that doesn't obviously, that doesn't seem to work it there. Let me just see. That doesn't help. Yeah, no, unfortunately not. We can't see it there. So just keep it there. I think people can read it with this one anyway, and we could bring it up again if we need to.
Okay, but you can hear the voice in the background.
Oh, can you now? Okay, perfect. All right. So, but if we need that, then we can do that. We could you just swap between the two. Okay.
Okay. Can I respond to useful clarification?
Hold on, James. Let me just ask you a quick question.
Okay, so now we're going to get sidetracked with Farouk. Okay,
Yeah.
In these sort of discussions, if he wants to talk about the Quran, that's one thing. But here he's out of his depth, right? He has no clue. He's very much like the lay Muslim that you meet on the street. And if you look at some of the people in the chat there, they're saying the same thing. Oh well, hey, if you got knowledge, that doesn't mean that you're forced to do something. He's now going to make an analogy that's going to take us off sidetrack, and we'll deal with how to, we explain how to deal with these bad analogies that can come up in a moment.
Do you have kids?
I do not have kids.
I got kids. I got 4 kids, right? So I know my kids pretty well, right? Not as well as Allah knows us, but I do know my kids pretty well. I'm just going to give a human example, just to give you understanding of a concept. I know my kids and their decision making. I know my kids and their likes and dislikes. Who likes chocolate ice cream? Who likes vanilla ice cream? Who likes what? Right? You feel me, James?
Yeah, sure.
So let's say I take my kid to the ice cream store. Now, I know some of them don't like ice cream and some of them like particular flavors, okay? As knowledgeable as I am of my kids, again, nothing in comparison to the knowledge of Allah on us, I know my son's going to choose, for example, chocolate ice cream, right? Does that mean that I forced him to choose chocolate ice cream?
Okay, so this is a terrible analogy, and I think hopefully if you're watching this, you can immediately see the problem with this. He already admitted it himself, right? I don't know if you caught that. Hey, I know them well, but not as well as Allah knows. There is a crucial difference, and we can immediately dismiss this analogy as disanalogous, because the whole point of this is that Allah knows all things. In other words, I looked it up today, actually, prior to starting here. The smallest particles known at the moment are leptons and quarks. That's the smallest known fundamental particles. There may be something smaller, as science says, but we're not aware of it. But Allah would know the position and the speed at every moment in time, broken down to the billionth of a nanosecond, of every lepton and quark in the entire universe. It would need to be that way for him to know all possible actions that are going on. In this case, of course, he just knows what his child is likely to. There's a high probability his kid would do it. Completely irrelevant and disanalogous. And so the question he's going to ask James, and James will say, yeah, of course, you're not forcing them. But immediately, hopefully, James will say, well, that's completely disanalogous. I'll explain to you why. Don't ever bring that up again. You've got to be hard with somebody like this, unfortunately, because he thinks that he's given a good example, and it's utterly disanalogous, as I hope I've just explained.
No.
Okay. So this was just a human example. You understand? So just to understand, this is to do with the knowledge of Allah, not the force of choosing. Do you understand? Allah gives us a choice. We make choices, right? There is free will there. But
no, there isn't. Okay. No. The fact that you're just saying this and giving a disanalogous example doesn't help your case at all. And that's why I say you can tell people who are more sophisticated in having discussions, etc. This is just waffle. I think it's very clear that this is disanalogous. He's now just making an assertion. And of course, it's 5-on-1 there, if you like. But I think you've got to be very clear with it. Say it's disanalogous. Don't ever bring this up again. And we're done. And here's the reason why. And then you ignore him because he's going to repeat this, by the way, multiple times here, as if he's made a substantial point. And the analogy is deeply flawed. So we can just ignore this.
And it's a straw man. I mean, this Farouk guy is a bit of a simpleton, okay? Because he jumps in with any kind of idea that comes into his brain without thinking about it. It is not about free force. It is not about force. Nobody is talking about force. We are talking about whether somebody has knowledge of something. It is not about, James never claimed that he said that Allah is forcing somebody to do that. So why he brings in this force all of a sudden, I don't understand what the hell he's talking about. I don't know why he feels the need to bring this up when nobody is talking about it. This is, like Rob said, it's got nothing to do with it.
Well, ultimately stops, if you think about that, it ends up being that. It doesn't sound like it, but in a sense, Allah is forcing you to do things. That is the case, right? Because it would have to be the case. It's just that you are unaware of it. It's like me gently blowing in your ear and you're not aware of it, or whispering. I don't know if you've seen the movie, what was it, Wonder Woman, the first Wonder Woman, right? There was this part where the evil god, Ares, I think it was, he would be whispering. You'd see these when he's about to fight Wonder Woman, he's talking about him, and you can see like a ghost image in the background there doing things. It's a more powerful version of that. So he's giving suggestions, but there aren't actually suggestions in Allah's case. They are commands that you're just not aware that it's a command. You're being buffeted, but not even realizing it. So actually, in my view, Allah is forcing you to do it. It's so subtle that you're just not aware of it, because we're so fallible. We think, we've got free will, and we think that we're not being buffeted by other things. But if determinism is true, then we are being buffeted at all times. We're just not even aware. These sentences coming out of my mouth, I have no clue where they came from prior to just saying it right now. If we rewound the clock, I'd say exactly the same thing. I couldn't have done otherwise, but it doesn't feel like it in the moment. But this example of his is just, as you quite rightly pointed out, utterly disanalogous. Now, James didn't use the word force, that's true, but I actually would say that, and I'll explain it as I did now, that it would have to be the case that he's forcing you, but not in the sense of like he's pushing you, that you're aware of the force. Allah is so subtle that he's doing it in a way that you are just utterly unaware of. He would have to, otherwise you could have chosen B or A instead of C. But if he knew we're going to choose C, then it had to be the case that he would manipulate the universe, including you, to choose C in some way that is, just almost imperceptible to you. Otherwise, you could have chosen B or A. And that couldn't have been the case if he's all-powerful or all-knowing.
And there's another perspective to this, or another dimension, because, while you're not being like intentionally or whatever forced, but you have been pre-programmed not to like vanilla ice cream, because that is the way that you were created according to the Muslim belief of this creator God. Because he creates you with your genes, the way everything that is predetermined, everything that he knows is already there. So not only does he know that you don't like vanilla ice cream, but the way that you are created already precludes any whatever wish for vanilla ice cream. So there are different dimensions here, how you are being guided into a specific behavioral pattern, but there is no mention here of any forcing anybody into something. Here we are only talking about free will, and we're only talking about the decisions being taken by a person on their own, and this is what doesn't exist according to what James is saying. So, but I don't understand. Okay, yeah, I just don't understand why this guy always sees a need to jump in.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's just part of it, right? But this fellow here is, if determinism is true, which the overwhelming number of philosophers, theory of mind, etc., do think, then this is, of course, false. If you rewound the tree of life and you press play, it would come out exactly the same way. It couldn't have done otherwise. So that's not the case. That's just an intuitional view, but that's certainly not borne out if determinism is true. No matter how you rewind the clock, the same thing would play out. You'd have to go back to the very beginning of the universe if there was such a thing, and that initial state would have to be somehow different, and then everything could play out. But then again, it would only play out in one single path. If you rewind at any point, it'll play out exactly the same as it did before. That's determinism.
I'm a little bit unsure of that, because I maintain that there are some fluctuations in the quantum farm, and due to those fluctuations, it might look a little bit different, so that these split-second differences might, in the long term, lead up to slight variations. But I'm not 100% sure
you could
about
make
that.
Yeah, I mean, you could make that argument if you're a naturalist, but then somebody else could also make the argument that there's something cancelling that out, and so those fluctuations
are I'm aware of that.
But they don't have that argument, right? They can't say that there's anything in the quantum fluctuations that are random. They can't say that, because by definition, Allah knows all things. And so all of those things that would appear random by Muslims are in fact not random. It's just the fact that we don't understand it, that it appears random to us, but it couldn't be the case in their worldview. So it's even worse for them. You could argue that from a naturalist point of view, like you said, but they can't do that.
The greatness of Allah, the knowledge of Allah, the amazing high status of Allah, that he knows what decisions we'll make, but he doesn't force those upon us.
Just
like the example I gave you of my son, and again, like I'm saying, this is just a worldly example to give you a concept.
Just wait a second.
Yeah, sure.
Did you hear what he just said? He said, yes, he agrees with James. Allah knows everything, so he agrees that there is no free will, but he argues against free will while agreeing with it.
Yeah, they're confused, right? These guys are confused about this. They think in their mind, they've been taught something because they all say the same thing, right? Oh, well, hey, if he knows all things, he's not forcing you to do something. But I maintain that he is, and he would have to be in order for you to always choose the thing that Allah knew you were going to choose. If you didn't, and there was any possibility that you could choose B or A instead of C, if Allah's foreseen C, and then you could, and if there was a genuine possibility that you could choose B or A, then they would be correct. But then there's a possibility Allah could be wrong. And if you ask them, could Allah be wrong? They're going to say no. And so they are ruling out A and B by default themselves. Not that I'm doing it. They are doing it the moment they say it's not possible under any circumstances. He could be mistaken at any moment in time.
But I see now where the confusion comes from. The origin is the sentence, you have to do that one thing, which I understand it the way James, I think, intends it to mean it. And that is because you don't, because Allah knows everything, then you are on a track and you cannot divert from that track, because then God would know about this. But he does know that you are going to do that, so you don't have a choice. This is the intended meaning. But what they are doing is they're now nitpicking here. I say you have to do that one thing means that you are being forced to do that. They don't understand, I think, the philosophical argument behind this here, what this actually means, that what James is doing is he's talking about the consequence and not the initial action. And they don't understand this. This is what I see right now here.
Yeah, okay. Keep an eye as well if you can. The comments are rather small, but keep an eye there on the comments as well. That can be sometimes
I can't read them.
Informative or
small.
Entertaining. Okay, fair enough. If you're on a small device, you won't see it.
If I take my kids 100% of the time, I know what ice cream they're going to choose because I know their likes and dislikes. That does not mean that I force them to make that choice.
But you didn't create.
He's just repeating himself, and well, he doesn't know what they're going to do 100% of the time. Otherwise, he would have had a time machine. And actually, they're going to bring up a time machine. But again, that's very different, right? The only thing you need to keep pressing here at this point is omniscience. That's the key word, the key phrase, the key idea that just you can blow aside all of these analogies, everything, all the waffle that he's bringing there and the false analogy. Just use the word omniscience. And anything other than that, if you hear anything other than that, it's just waffle and it's a straw man. It's irrelevant. It's not answering the point. And they're so desperate to bring up analogies because that's what they're taught to do. Unfortunately, 99 times out of 100, when a Muslim brings up an analogy, this is my anecdotal experience of speaking to hundreds of Muslims, it's always almost always disanalogous. So you can immediately go, okay, this is not going to work. And normally you bring up an analogy if somebody doesn't understand something. It's not that James doesn't understand, ironically, it's that they don't understand. So they bring in an analogy to try and help James when in fact the analogy is disanalogous and shows that they don't understand. The irony here is just, obviously something that we can pick up on as well.
And that's a very important point that you are raising there. With this analogy, we need everybody needs to understand this. If there is an analogy, immediately test it for validity, because, like I said, 99% it's not going to be valid. Now, another thing, James, if you're listening, or anybody else who's going for this argument, one thing that I found useful is a very simple question, which always throws them. I don't know why, and that is, can Allah be surprised? And this is something where they will immediately go and say, no, Allah can't be surprised. But they don't understand the consequence of what it is that they are saying, because they are actually now saying, yes, we agree with that. Because if Allah cannot be surprised, that means you are doing everything that He already knows and you don't have free will. So it's very easy. And this is something that I've learned.
It's a different way of approaching it, isn't it? And maybe it gets them to think. But they're so ingrained in thinking from a human analogy, as Farouk has done here. And so when you're speaking to them, in their mind, they're imagining a human doing this and then mapping that onto Allah. And that's the part you've got to break apart and, as I call it, scratch the record, because the record is just playing in their heads. And it's somehow we've got to turn off the record or play it backwards or whatever the case is. It's just a term I used to use in, like, when we used to do psychology and so on. So you've got to scratch the record because the record is just playing. And if you can't interfere with that record, it's just going to keep playing regardless of what other information is going on around it.
Okay.
Next.
Is it okay if I respond to Uthman first and then maybe get back to Yusuf?
Respond to Yusuf first, and then
Okay. Okay, sure. That's a good idea.
And of course, he won't be able to do that. Remember, we've got 5 guys here. It's very unlikely he'll be able to do that. But I agree, amazingly enough, with Hamza. Just ignore Farouk. All you could say is that's disanalogous and just move on. I mean, I've explained it here, and James, obviously, I'm not sure that he'll get a chance if I remember to do it now. But just deal with Yusuf, right? Because Farouk has no clue here, right? It's totally disanalogous, and so you can just bypass that.
So yeah, for Yusuf, I'd like to get a little bit more clarification because I missed about sort of 5 seconds of cutting out. So the clarification I'd like is so like what do you consider to be a choice? Like what is making a choice? Is it doing the action involved in that choice, or is it just having that brain state thinking, oh, I'd like to do this? What is a choice to you?
So a choice is that you experience a sequence of moments, and in those moments, a particular circumstance arises in your experience in which there are a number of possibilities that you could pick from, and you're cognizant of those possibilities, and you can pick or choose to move in one direction or the other. And then as moments pass, there is a particular moment in which you do pick one of them, and then that is your choice made. But this is included within the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. So it's not like when people make the argument you've made, they generally tend to just focus on the fact that Allah knows of the moments when you've made the decision, but he also knows the moments prior to that where there's a choice available and you've got.
Okay, so his main thing is, it seems to me, is the moments before the choice. And I think that's what James was talking about, and that's what I would be talking about. I'm not talking about the physical action or the deliberation. I mean, you could talk about that, and again, we could get into compatibilism. But the initial state of when something arises, a mental state arises in your brain, and you have, as he pointed out there, the ability at that moment to, okay, here's a mental state that's arisen, and now the next mental state is, okay, I have these various choices. So let's say the mental state is, I want to get ice cream, and you have 3 flavors in your fridge. The next mental state is, which flavor shall I choose today or at this moment, right? So first mental state is, I'm going to have this ice. Where did that come from? No clue. Somebody will give a post hoc reasoning and say, well, it's because I was thirsty or I was hot. Well, how did you choose ice cream instead of an ice block or cold water? And people will try and rationalize it. But if you ask enough questions, they'll come to a point where they can no longer rationalize what it is. And this is all post hoc, right? They're trying to think of why it was the case. Because they don't know why, they're trying to come up with an explanation after the fact to explain it. But once that initial state has happened, I want ice cream, let's say, for example, then the next state is, okay, I want to choose at that moment. Can you, if Allah said you got to choose chocolate, can you choose vanilla or caramel, right? No, that's the part I think, and I hope that's what James is focusing on, and I would be too, is that moment in time, that choice that arose in your head, the mental state that I can have these 3, that wasn't a real choice, that was totally illusionary. And that's the only part, because after that, it doesn't matter. If you could deliberate and you could, in some sense, go, I've made this free choice of chocolate, I'm now going to, quote, eat the chocolate, if you like, that's irrelevant. If the past choice was determined for you, then you don't have free will. That's the only part we need to focus on.
And that's a good example, because another thing that I've done in the past is I've asked people, okay, if I have decided to have ice cream and Allah knows that I will have ice cream, can I go and have water instead? And then, and this is the funny thing, a lot of Muslims will say, yes, of course, because you're not forced to do it. Of course, you can change your mind. You have free will that you can have water. And then I will say, yeah, but hang on. Allah knows that I will have ice cream. No. He will know that you have changed your mind. So they don't understand that this determinism precludes free will. You can't have this, because Correct. It doesn't matter how many times you have changed your mind. Allah must have known how many times you will change your mind until eventually you will decide to have one of the 2, but He will have known it. And this is Correct. Something they simply do not understand.
Yep, correct. Doesn't matter how many times you change your mind. He knew all the times you're going to change your mind. He knew the outcome of whatever 15 times you changed your mind. That outcome that you eventually decided on, the mental state, and you went, I'm selecting that one. He knew that, so it doesn't matter. He knew all of those things. So them bringing that up is irrelevant.
You've got a decision to make.
So you said that a choice involves there being possibilities. Mm-hmm. And so, like, I'd understand that to mean that, a possibility has to be possible, i.e., it like that. if it were impossible, then it wouldn't be a possibility, is what I'm
So it
guessing
needs
at.
to be viable, yeah.
But what I'm saying is that that seems to be contradicted by the idea that Allah knows perfectly, exactly, at every single point in time, the single thing that you're inevitably going to do.
Exactly.
Because that means there is only one thing that's possible. So there are at no point possibilities. There's only one thing that you can do, and you have to do it.
Okay, I think James has laid that out really well there. And I think the only thing to add on is that that's Allah's view. Obviously, we're not saying that humans know that, because we don't know that. But ultimately, the state of affairs, the ontology of the world, whatever's out there, Allah knows that, right? And we're not saying that humans do. And so there's other possibilities, as we've repeated, and we probably will again. Those other quote-unquote possibilities are illusionary. They're not actual possibilities. They're impossibilities that appear possible, essentially, just because we are, deluded. Not deluded, but I guess we just don't know the real thing. If we could see everything that's going on, we could see everything that's going to happen in our life. If we were omniscient, we go, I see what's going to happen, where I'm going to die, etc. All those other things, they're just window dressing to make it look as if I could have gone another way, but I couldn't actually do it. So I think he's explained it really well. Just tack on that this applies to Allah, to keep them focused on Allah here. But
And
here
now,
you can see it right. They're bringing up this point here at the bottom.
Yeah, I was just going
James,
to comment on this. Exactly.
Okay, you go ahead. Yeah.
No, you go for it.
I mean, this is totally irrelevant, right? But this is the level that they want to bring up. That he had free to cut his hair like he did. I don't think he should blame God for that. I mean, it's totally irrelevant, right? If you want to, if it's a case of you want to have some lightheartedness, they're fine. But it's irrelevant to the argument, of course. So, I would be looking for people like we do here that bring up something that's interesting to actually talk about, that isn't like window dressing, that isn't about the person. And you'll see a lot of that with these Muslims, at least the commenters. It's all about the person.
But I would like to take this person by the scruff of their neck, shake them, and then ask them, well, who is to blame for it? And then if he says, well, it's James, he had free will. Well, hang on, who programmed his hair to grow like that? Wasn't that Allah? Well, yeah, it was. Okay. Was he programmed to do exactly this? Yes, he was. Well, what are you going to do about it? You can't. Everything is predetermined if you believe that Allah created every human being with the knowledge what they're going to do. So he created James with that hair, with the intention of going to the hairdresser on that particular day to go and have his haircut in this specific way. That's how it was programmed to be. There's no other way.
Yeah.
So
this basically ties into a notion of how we would understand time, which I think we don't really have like a decent way of explaining how time so for example, does Allah experience all moments simultaneously, or is it simply that his knowledge is able to foresee events that are to come? Like I don't know enough.
I don't think that makes a difference in my view, one way or the other. I mean, maybe there's an argument for it, but I don't see that being the case. As long as he knows what you as a human will do, whether he can see all moments simultaneously or whether he sees them as a sequence, one moment after the other, and he can look backwards and forwards along a line, or he's just got a helicopter view and sees all the moments simultaneously happening at so being outside of time is their view. I don't see how this makes any difference. As long as he's omniscient and knows what that is, it doesn't seem to matter one way or the other. So to me, this is an irrelevant point that he's bringing up, unless he's got an argument, right? So I'd be listening. Okay, I don't see the relevance of this one way or the other. Can you provide an argument that in one sense of time, somehow this makes a difference to us as human beings, or indeed to Allah's knowledge? What's the difference, and what argument have you got to present that? Otherwise, it's irrelevant.
To be able to comment on what particular version of time we would ascribe to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a whole.
Doesn't that speak volumes as well? The fact that he decided to bring up that comment that came up and down there, like in like 1 second or whatever it was, right? That James is Islamophobic and snotty or whatever. Notice who's bringing the comments up. Who do you think's bringing these comments up? Right, obviously because he's bored, we can't follow the conversations.
No, it's one of the moderators.
So you have to bring up ad hominems against James himself, because there isn't anything in the chat that's even remotely substantial. And that should say a lot, right? They probably had like 800 people watching this, and he had to select. Maybe there was somebody that we've entirely missed out of all of the nonsense and sheer noise that's going on in there, but he had to select one that was irrelevant to the point. And he does this all the time, by the way.
So different
If
discussion.
I may just add a bit
Yeah,
to
yeah,
what Yusuf said. So we had a discussion
no.
on this very topic recently at Speaker's Corner. It was uploaded today actually on Dawa Wise channel. So have a look at that, James. It does answer your question. The title is "Free Will and Determination, Are They Contradictory?" So just to add to what Yusuf was just saying, there. So there are four categories of time that we know. Three that we do know already: the past, the present, and the future. And there's a fourth that Allah knows. In addition to this, is the potential. Yes, so the potential choice they'll make, Allah knows all the different potential choice a person would make. So it's not like you're saying, James, like one thing and only one thing Allah knows, and that's it. He knows every potential scenario that a person would make a choice with regards to that action that he or she is going to take. So Allah knows.
I don't know if he's reading something off. It looks like he's looking down and reading something off there. But again, that doesn't help. The potentials, we're only cared about the actual. There's an actual versus potential, right? There's two different categories. Yes, I can agree that Allah knows all potential avenues. If you had a maze, Allah knows all potential avenues that a human could take. But the important one is that he knows the actual path that you will take. And that's all we need. So telling us that he knows all the potentials isn't relevant unless you want to bring an argument that says somehow that affects something. But I don't see that affecting anything. And I can grant that he knows all potentials. I'm only interested in the actual one.
Allah knows every possibility. And knowing something doesn't mean you're forcing someone. For example,
there we go again, right? So he says the
Oh,
same
goodness.
thing. Notice how they all say the same thing. And I would just challenge them at this point. And then I would explain with the leptons and the quarks how it must be the case that he's forcing you. But they think of force as in like physically grabbing you or something. But if you watch Darren Brown, if you're watching this now, Google Darren Brown, right? He will get people to do things. He will essentially, as close to, like a God as you can get, as far as I can tell at least, not with certainty, but he will force people, in inverted commas, to do things. What we mean in this case, at least with Darren Brown, is that he's got all this information that's bombarding you that you're not aware of, and you think there's a great example of it with one of these actors that went into a room and he said, draw something. And this guy drew whatever it was. I think it was a bicycle. I can't remember exactly. And he was amazed, and Darren Brown showed him the bike that he'd got him or the present that he got him. And then he showed afterwards all the things that he had in this guy's awareness to get him to make that selection. And the cameras play it back and you see it, and they're focusing on all the things in his awareness, even when he comes into, before he even got to the room, he's driving. And you see these things that your conscious mind would miss, but the subconscious is taking all this information in. When he gets into the room, everything's placed in a certain way to help push him in that direction. The words that Darren uses, everything is quote unquote the closest we can get to forcing without it feeling like it's forcing. Now imagine an omniscient Darren Brown. And I think then you can immediately see how this would work out. Just think of an omniscient Darren Brown and you'd be going, wow, I don't know how I did that. It's just Darren Brown on steroids that couldn't be wrong. All of everything that's going on that he does. I'll see if we can find a video, maybe TDS Dave or anybody who's watching here. If you can find one of those videos where he gets the people to make a selection and then rewinds the camera and shows it. And then you just imagine the omniscient version of that. And then it becomes so blatantly obvious.
What does he call it? The subliminal.
Yeah, it's the subliminal. What's the word? The messages that are coming in that is as close to human forcing that doesn't appear to be human forcing as you will see. Right? He's a master of doing this. He can do it by getting you to say it in your mind. And he will start to say things, and he will eventually select the name that you're thinking of. All kinds of things like this. That's as close to forcing you to do something as you could think.
Words, yeah.
You just think that it's not the case. Yeah, it's just amazing, right? So that's a great example. And I say, just take it on steroids, and then you immediately say, well, of course, this is exactly what Allah would do. All of the stimulus that's coming in is giving me the idea of doing this without me knowing that it's an idea. Very simple.
Allah has destined that James will come on this live stream, and James knows that he came here with his free will. Did somebody force you, James?
Wow.
Well, my answer to this is yes. Okay, obviously my answer is going to be yes. They like the word force because it sounds to the Muslim ear like this can't be the case. Allah has made it the case that I've come on here. You could use the word force. All we need is, because I think that's being uncharitable anyway, but I could go with it if I have to. But he's made it the case that I've come on, just like the Darren Brown example. And maybe if we ever do this in future, and James, if you're listening, get the video, have it ready. If we ever do this again, then bring up the video, explain this on how Darren Brown does it, and then just imagine that he was God. And then it will become, I hope, so apparent how easy this is to get somebody to do something, to quote unquote force them to do it as close as possible, and Allah doing the same thing, and they just wouldn't be aware that they're being forced. That's the level that we're talking about here, and that's what these guys just think is not possible. And I think the Darren Brown, and I only thought of it now today, right, as we were talking about it, but I think that highlights it extremely well.
Beach, what video is this?
I'll see if I can find it. If you type in Darren Brown, there'll be one, and I think it was with one of these actors that sat down and he got him to draw something, and I think it was a bicycle. I'll see if I can find it. Like I say, just popped in my head now, if you can find it. But then afterwards, he goes like, oh, that's amazing. And then afterwards, they show you everything that happened. And he's done this to
shows like
quite
this.
A few. Stephen Fry is another one that he did it with, but I don't think the example wasn't quite as good as this other one. But this other one was just extraordinarily good. And he's done it a few times, but that's the one that's in my memory, where things are happening, where they're walking or being driven, and things are in the window that you wouldn't necessarily, your mind wouldn't see. And so, and then you come there and you think you've made a free choice. In fact, it's been a heavily influenced choice. Now just imagine that Allah did this and he couldn't be wrong about it. Right?
Exactly, where somebody is being influenced to buy a giraffe out of all the different choices she would have had in a shop to buy things, and she picks exactly this, and then afterwards you're being shown why exactly she decided on that, because she was shown
exactly right.
for the whole day posters, pictures, words, some messages which go to the subconscious, which are always spelling out giraffe, 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 giraffe. And you think when you go to the shop, what should I take? Okay, let me go and take a giraffe.
Exactly.
And you have no clue why you're doing it.
Yeah, you wouldn't know it. You've been influenced. But now imagine the omniscient influencer, that would be forced, because you couldn't have done otherwise. If you had a free choice, now there's a possibility with Darren that you might not choose that, but that it's so stacked against you that the chances of you not choosing it is vanishingly small. Now just multiply that up to infinity with Allah, for example, and then the chance of you choosing something else is impossible. And that's what James is pointing to.
And this is a good point now, because what James could have done here, even now this Hisham guy comes in, is it Hashim or Hisham? Hashim. Okay. When he comes in now, ask a question and say, okay, why do you think that there is force involved, and could he have done something else, or could I have done something else? You said that I came on the show out of my own free will and Allah knew about it. So could I have changed my mind and Allah did not know about it? What is your opinion on that? And just to get them thinking a bit, and just to get them, throw them off balance, because they are now in their ruts. This is like a tram following the lines. And this is where it's time to change into question mode.
Yeah, they're all going to repeat, hey, he's not forcing you, right?
Yeah.
As you say, you've got to try and scratch that record, because they're just going to repeat that as if that's a knockdown argument.
So no one, puts a gun to my head, you could say.
Did you choose to come on?
So would you say you feel like a free will?
Well,
Okay, here's the thing, James. Did you choose to come on, and did I choose to let you on?
Exactly.
Well, that depends. Is it possible for you to have done otherwise? Because if not,
brilliant.
Okay, I can do that, can't I? And then I can do that again.
None of that is a choice. You only think it is. I'm not sure that this was kind of the strongest response James could have had. I mean, I understand the picture, and so do most of us who are listening, right? But to get the point across to these guys, maybe a slightly different approach there. And the answer would be, obviously, no, you didn't have that choice. But that in and of itself is just us asserting no. We've got to explain to them why the no it couldn't have been otherwise. And James is doing the best he can. And I think, the Darren Brown example would be a good one in future to bring up. But they're laughing about it because they just take it for granted they got free will. They haven't looked into this. The moment you start to look into it, it is counterintuitive. But the moment you start to look into it, you find that determinism is, once you understand it, it seems counterintuitive until you understand it, and you understand the opposite of libertarian free will. Once you understand it, you go, well, obviously that can't be the case. But because people don't sort of look into it, it just seems intuitively the case.
But do you think that any one of them would have understood the Darren Brown example?
I don't know. I mean, it's worth trying. Next time I'll ask some Muslims maybe on Discord or something. I'll run through it and then just go, imagine that was Allah, so that those, where he was influencing you, that influence was such that you couldn't have done otherwise. Would you call that? Actually, I might not even bring it up in that way. I might tweak it and go, hey, if I could influence you such that you couldn't be mistaken, would you call that force? Would I be forcing you? Coercion would be another word. They could select coercion, but coercion such that you couldn't have done otherwise. And if I said to you, hey, but you're free to do something, but actually I know that the coercion is such that you can't do anything else, would you call that force? Maybe that's another way to do it. Ask that question up front before you bring the argument up. Right? That might be another way to do it, because once you bring the argument up, then they're committed to saying, no, you've got to have free will. So before you bring the argument, bring up an example like that, see what they say before their mind is primed to reject the argument out of hand. That's another way to do it, where you might get a more sort of thoughtful response.
Yeah, but I would have never foreseen that they're going to jump on this force thing. Come on, this is.
I've heard it before at Speaker's Corner. That's why I knew it was coming. They say the same thing there, and I had this exact a similar conversation with Hashim about 4 years ago or something. So I know they're doing it. He even brought me a dentist that was apparently somebody that had spoken, that had learned some philosophy, and he said the same thing as well. I was like baffled, right? None of them understand the more nuanced understandings, but even, and we don't need to go into that here because they're not bringing it up anyway. But I don't think that solves the problem in any case.
No, the question was not whether you let him on the live stream. The question was for him to even come to the live stream, whether he come on the panel or not. That's a different issue. He came. What do you question is, did you come by your free will or did someone force you?
Well, what do you mean by a choice?
You tell me. Do you know that you came here by force? Did someone compel you to come here, or did you come with your free will?
Notice there that's also he slipped in. Did someone compel you? It's not the case that it's someone. It's just the case that cause and effect, your environment, every particle has forced you to do it. You're just not aware of it. So notice he threw in there someone. So you've got to quickly say, I'm not claiming that it's someone that coerced or forced me. I'm claiming, or the claim is, if you're a determinist, that it's the state of ontology, the reality out there is forcing me to make a decision in some way, or at least forcing, if not a decision, if you want to be a compatibilist, it's these thoughts are arising in some way that I have no control over. If I have no control, then I'm not free to have a thought that pops into my head, or indeed free to choose something different in this case.
How do you understand the word choice? Okay, James. How do you understand the word choice?
Somebody else?
So I think I understand the word choice to mean kind of so I'll give what isn't a choice first. Perhaps.
No, tell what is a choice.
Okay, that might take me a little bit long to do. Okay.
Well, you just said what do you mean by choice? As if you have a different definition of the word choice, as if there's more than one understanding.
Yeah, I think there is.
The choice is you have options, and you select which option.
Okay, but the options, do you agree, Hamza? They have to be possible for you to choose.
Did you answer the question?
Yeah. That was a very good question James answered. And the fact that Hamza laughs there, again, just tells us that he really is not equipped to have these sort of conversations. Because the answer would need to be yes, of course. In order for something to be a choice, do those options need to be possible? If they're impossible, then it's not a choice by anybody's definition. It's the illusion of choice at best. But they are not claiming that it's an illusion of choice. They think you actually have these other options. So they would have to say these other options must be possible. But he laughs about it. And that tells me, right, I listen carefully to responses that people have. And a response like that tells me that he didn't understand the question. Mm-hmm. He did not understand the implications of the question, or indeed how to answer it. So he came back there with, and laughs about it, right? A thoughtful person would understand exactly what's being said there and would respond with something, far better than that. And you go, okay, I know what they're saying, right? I might disagree, but I understand. And their response tells me that they understand what I asked, and they're responding with whatever they're responding with. That response tells us he didn't understand it.
Yeah, of course we do.
Yeah, there have to be possibilities, like you said. Okay, right.
Could I choose to jump onto the moon? No, I can't.
Okay, cool.
Right, so let's get back. Listen. Let's not play semantical games here, James. Just one second, James. Let's not play semantical.
Okay, so this whole semantical games, this is from somebody who's a simpleton, right? When you hear this, these are nuanced discussions, and philosophers will go to a level that will make all of us just pull our hair out, right? And we're just lay people, right? But he's on a different sort of simplistic level. He just thinks that there's sort of one answer, it's his answer, and that's all there is. And James is trying to explain that if you have a choice, those choices need to be possible. And he wants them to agree that's the case. Yeah, sometimes we take a long time to review things because there's so many things to bring up here that we could ignore it and only do one or two things. But I think hopefully most people enjoy or at least understand things that maybe you would have otherwise taken for granted here. And that's why I stop so often. I mean, I could stop less, I guess.
We're just here to help.
And the idea of you can't jump to the moon, well, there's no contradiction, right? It's not logically impossible. It's physically impossible. And I heard this recently, and that's a good distinction, right? It's not a case that it's logically impossible to jump to the moon. It's simply physically impossible, given our current understanding of physics, our abilities, etc., etc. So that there is a distinction even there, right? Difference between logical possibility and physical or metaphysical possibility. There is a difference.
Play semantical games here. You asked us, this was your words, what do you mean by choice? So that means you have a different understanding of the word choice. So I tell you what to do. You tell us how you understand the word choice, and we'll tell you how we understand the word choice, because we might be talking past each other. So how do you understand the word choice?
Yeah, I agree with what you said when you described the choice. Provided by option, you meant something that's possible. However,
between two or more possibilities. All right, one second.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
So let's understand something, James.
Wait.
Just 1 second, James.
I haven't had the.
Let's just understand something. Mm-hmm. Understanding of words is not subjective, right? It's objective.
I mean,
so this is what the word choice means.
Okay.
Just 1 second, James. Okay, an act of choosing between two or more possibilities. So your possibility flex is there as well. So a choice is choosing between two or more possibilities.
Okay, why did you have to look that? That's exactly what James said anyway. And he said, do you agree with this? And now he had to go look it up and say what James has said anyway. What was the point of that? Possibilities is the main thing. And James said it multiple times. It needs to be possible for there to be an actual choice. Otherwise, it's just the illusion of choice. Why is this so difficult? Why did he have to go look that up? Was it the case that he didn't understand it himself, or he didn't understand James's one, or he needed to check it? But he's now basically said exactly what James has said.
He's frozen.
Give me one moment in time.
It's just unhelpful, right? Hamza is completely unhelpful in any of these discussions. It's a shame that he has to say anything at all here. Time is just taken up where you could be having it with perhaps Yusuf Ponders or Ijaz or somebody else that maybe is a little bit more thoughtful on these, has more of an understanding, is more charitable, is trying to understand the other person and respond. Hamza it's just like we could count the minutes in here and just take those all out and the conversation would be better. It's sad that waste of time is being taken up because he doesn't understand these things. He's got the patience of a goldfish.
Pull them out, Hamza, and put them back in. Pull them out and put them back in.
I think we need to define free will as well, because free will is a freedom to have a choice on how you act and so on. So we need to bring that in as well, because that is the reason I asked him, what did you come here by your free will? That will entail the choice as well.
I think, forgive me, Sheikh, I think what he wanted to say was that he had the appearance of choice, as if to say he didn't have the opportunity to choose because it's already predetermined for him.
But there you go, right? That's okay. So Ijaz understood this, right? He just understood that that's the idea, that you guys as well as us, it's the illusion of choice that we have. And if we were to zoom out and go sit on Allah's shoulder, and for a moment Allah gave us his omniscience to see this, we go, gee whiskers, actually all of those things were illusions. Thank you, Allah, for showing me that. That's what would happen if any of this was true, and he gave us that ability and said, hey, come sit on my shoulder. I'll show you what the world actually looks like, not your perception of the world, because you're fallible and you don't know very much. Let me show you what it's really like. And then exactly what Ijaza says there, that's what it would be the case.
But that's the reason I asked him, did he feel that he came here by his free will? If you yourself feel that you came here on your free will as a free agent, then why would you assume that you were compelled to come here? Okay, good question, right? So it's a good question initially, because it's intuitive that, if you feel like you came here, why would you question it? Because that's what people do. They question, do my feelings match reality? I mean, otherwise everybody could just go, hey, whatever I feel is reality. And that obviously isn't a good rational position to take. And so we want to question and say, hey, do our feelings match it? And when we start to look into it, we actually find that even though, some sort of free will is intuitive, if you don't think about it, the moment you start to think about it, you go, no, this can't be the case. Or it's very, very unlikely that this is the case. Or you really have to now go into some philosophical jargon to try and make it seem as if you've got libertarian free will. But libertarian free will
normally understood, or at least basically understood, at least by me, is the view that you are able to select the next thought that you're going to think. And then when the choice comes up, you've got these options to choose freely, completely uncoerced. And when you look into that, how could you choose your next thought? That would mean you'd have to think it before you think it. You'd have to see all these thoughts there and go, I'm going to select that one. Right, now I've thought it, let's go on. And you can see that it becomes absurd in that sense. And then you'd have to look at the choices and go, okay, there's no external influences happening on me in any possible way. How you could rule that out when, determinism seems to be true, that would be interesting. And so you really are, you're just at the mercy of being buffeted around by all the subatomic particles and everything else in the universe and every interaction and everything else that's going on. And that's how you're making this choice. And that's how I'm saying this sentence. That's how all of you who are here have got here. You thought you made a free choice. It was complete illusion. If we reround the universe, this exact same thing would be happening at this exact same moment again.
The fact that Allah knows about it does not stop you from coming here, does it?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I had an internet issue. What I was trying to say was that I agree with the sort of intuitive understanding or definition, the normal definition of choice. But the implication of that understanding of choice is that there must be other possibilities, right? If there's only one thing that you can possibly do and you have to do it, then you do not have a choice at all.
Okay.
So, right, yeah, that's fair. James,
let me just
your haircut. Did you choose that haircut?
Well, that depends on whether it's possible for me to do otherwise.
Well, could you not shave your head?
Well, I couldn't if God has infallibly foreseen that I will.
No, that's a good answer, right? That's a good answer. Bring it back to them. Because this is just a red herring. It's a case of deciding whether you want to entirely ignore Hamza and speak to somebody else, especially if they're speaking. But if there's silence, then it almost feels like, okay, shit, I've got to answer this simpleton. But if I can avoid it and I just deal with somebody else, then I just ignore his question. Because the moment I go in there, it's just a waste of time. It takes us off on a tangent that isn't relevant. And so that's the choice that you have to make in real time in this case. Now, if Farouk or somebody else, or ideally, if Yusuf was speaking, then you just ignore that and you carry on speaking as if Hamza had said nothing, like you couldn't hear it or it in one ear and out the other, because it isn't of any substance.
No, but now you missed that moment in time where you had that choice too or not.
James, let me ask you a quick question. Hold on. Let me just. This is going to end with this. Okay, watch.
Okay, as soon as he says he's going to end with this, it's not going to be the end. And again, between Hamza and Farouk, neither of these guys are helpful, right? Even Hashim is not much better, but you can see Ijaz understands the tension, and I think Yusuf does to some degree. So you really want to focus your time on the guys that understand this better, which is the two guys in the top, sort of in the middle and the top right.
James, and I just want you to be honest. Okay, that's the only thing I ask is honesty, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say Ijaz wants to get a haircut. Okay, his hair looks fine, mashallah. I'm just giving an example, right? So he wants to get a haircut, and he has complete free will. I mean, we're just giving a example here, okay? Meaning he can shave his head, he can get a mohawk, he can get a marine cut, he can get whatever.
You see, I'd interrupt the Sheikh at this point and go, okay, you're presupposing that you've got a quote unquote complete free will. I don't accept that you have a complete free. What do you mean by free will? And what's the argument that you have got free will in the sense that you mean libertarian free will, presumably? I don't think he knows what libertarian free will is anyway, but I wouldn't grant him that you've got complete free will because I don't think that concept is a coherent one, at least in the way I understand. If there's some other definition of libertarian free will, and if you go look on the Phil papers, very few philosophers accept libertarian free will. Most are compatibilists, and some number are determinists. So it's quite a small number of people, and then they will have to redefine it in some other way to make it coherent.
Whatever he can get, whatever you call that thing on your head, he can get any haircut he likes, okay? But you, James, have...
You notice the little quip there. What about that thing that's on your chin there, whatever you call that? Some sort of mess on your chin there, right? So there's another sort of ad hom quietly snuck in there about James's haircut, and we could say exactly the same about that hairy mess that's on his chin. But,
do you know Jeremy Clarkson?
Do that, except that he brought this up in passing there because he thinks he's a pretty smart ass.
Do you know Jeremy Clarkson?
Yes, yeah, the guy from Top Gear.
What does he call it? Face fungus.
Right, okay.
I figured out a time machine. That's how intelligent you are. You've got a time machine.
Oh my
and God. You go into the future and you see what haircut Ijaz got. Okay? It's his choice. He could have made any choice. He could have got a bald head. He could have got, just a big Hindu thingy. He could have got choose spikes, mating, whatever he likes, right? But he makes a decision from his own free will. But you, James, went into the future. You saw the decision he made.
Okay.
You come back into the past. Now you know what he's going to do. Does that mean he did not have free will?
It does, because
it does.
Right? But the reason why it does mean that he didn't have free will is because me having, by virtue of that time machine, infallible knowledge of the future makes it impossible for him to have chosen another haircut. It means that there is only one thing he could have done in this respect.
So James,
Sorry, do you want to say something here, Stops?
No,
or is it somebody else? I'm not always sure if it's you or the panel.
It was somebody else.
Yeah. Okay, let's just finish this bit and then we'll talk about this whole time machine thing.
The choice.
James, you don't understand what free will. I'm sorry. Let me just say because again, you're going down a tangent.
Okay, the irony of him saying you don't understand what free will is. The immediate thing there would be, okay, you explain to me what you understand by free will. But if you're claiming that I don't understand, please enlighten us on what you understand, and then potentially you might have to make an argument why I ought to accept that as well. If I don't understand something, you tell me what it is and tell me why I ought to accept your understanding. Because I bet you if we go online, there'll be different ideas on free will, and that's fine, but we need to agree on one. So if you're telling me I don't understand, you need to tell me what yours is and why I need to accept it.
That really makes no sense. So I'm going to step out of this after this. I'm just saying this. So good.
James is going to step
People
out.
have choices. People have choices. They're going to choose one. Just because you, through going into a time portal, figured out what they're going to choose doesn't mean they didn't have a choice. That's not what it means. You just have prior knowledge now of whatever choice they, on their own free will,
it just means you know what choice they made.
Exactly. Knowing somebody's choice doesn't mean they didn't have a choice. Allah is more knowledgeable than somebody with a time machine.
There you go. What he doesn't notice is he just shot himself in the foot. Allah's more knowledgeable than somebody who had a time machine. And if it were the case that James went forward and saw that Hijaz had this haircut, then all that happened prior to this is Hijaz thought he had a choice. But in fact, there wasn't a choice. Now imagine, and he said it himself, Allah is far more powerful than any time machine. Right? It's the case that it couldn't have been otherwise. And he can go forward and he can see the time, depending on their view of how Allah works, whether it's he's atemporal and can see all moments simultaneously, or whether he can zoom backwards and forwards at any point, whether he's doing it in some sequential way. They're not clear, and nobody really knows if there is a God how that particular thing works. But he's just said it himself. And the fact is that it's just an illusion of choice. And that's the thing to keep coming back to. And of course, we remember we said it right at the beginning, omniscience. With the time machine thing, James is not omniscient. And you would have to assume that the time machine couldn't have been mistaken. But James is not omniscient. He's not the one making that decision. Something else is acting on Ijaz for him to make that decision. And it isn't libertarian free will.
And the other thing with the time machine, what I would do to this fool, I would just ask him, can Ijaz do something different? If I go to the future and he has a mohawk, can he now go and change his mind and get a crew cut? No, he cannot. So where's free will?
Yeah, but they're going to claim that at the time before you left in the time machine, he had free will. The fact that you went to see the outcome doesn't mean that he didn't have free will. That's what they're trying to say here.
Yeah, but in fact, it doesn't work that way.
Well, no, they're presupposing that you have libertarian free will and nothing is acting on you. You actually have some sort of free choice and you're not being buffeted or it's not happening randomly or whatever the case is. That's the presupposition here. And they need an argument for that. And as far as we can tell, that's just, there isn't a good one for that. And especially if you bring Allah into the mix, now you're making it even more difficult. With the time machine is bad enough, but you add Allah, and by his own lights, Allah knows more than the time machine, is greater than time machine. What he doesn't realize, it's just making it worse for him, not better.
Exactly.
And that's his confusion, right? But Farouk and Hamza are both the same thing, and I think Hashim as well, maybe even the other two guys as well. They're all under this illusion that, hey, you're not being forced. Hey, he knows it, but he's not forcing you. And we've got to scratch that record, and that's why I think the Darren Brown type thing would I'll try it out and see how well it works. We've got to tweak their intuitions here, because their intuitions are badly mistaken.
The only thing that I am observing is that from body language and that from reaction, that this Hamza, this Farouk guy, and what's it, Hashim or Hisham?
Hashim. Hashim.
React the same way, where Ijaz and Yusuf do not. Like when Hamza did his silly laugh, the other two also were laughing, the bottom two, but Ijaz and Yusuf were not, because they realized that the laugh was not really warranted. So they kept a very straight face and they didn't understand why the other three were laughing. So if you watch things like that, you see that there's a huge difference here between the two different groups here.
Mm.
So if there is a fixed future by virtue of either a time machine or infallible knowledge of the future, then the fact that the future is fixed means...
Stop. This is the central point. And this was very, very clever to bring this up. If there is a fixed future by virtue of a time machine or Allah, this is exactly the point. You can have the same outcome, whether it's a time machine or even more all-encompassing, which is in the form of Allah. This is exactly the point. So it doesn't matter which one you take. Neither one allows you, in retrospect, to change your mind. Yes, you seem to have free will while you are taking it, but if somebody tells you in the past, this is what you will have been done, no, this is what you will have been doing, then you don't have free will from a libertarian, exactly what your point is from a libertarian point of view. And that is exactly the point that James is now, he should be hammering home again and again. It doesn't matter whether it's a time machine or whether it's Allah in an even more all-gross or all-encompassing way. Very good point. I like that.
Yeah, and in retrospect, I'm just thinking that we should bypass this time machine thing anyway and just go back to omniscience, because they want to claim here with the whole time machine, they want to claim that at this moment, let's say now 2021, that if you jump forward to 2025 and you saw, or 2021 in 3 months' time, whatever it is, whatever Ijaz's haircut is, that at the moment now he had a choice. And that's the thing we need to deal with, not the after. And I'm going like, okay, well, the time machine thing isn't relevant there. Let's just stick with Allah, your example, because otherwise it gets confusing for the audience as well, and not for us as much as it is for the audience. So you just need to find a way to get rid of this analogy with the time machine. But that's why having Farouk ask questions takes you off on a tangent like this. Smart interlocutors won't do that. They will understand the nature of this and they will have some other response to it. People that don't understand this will ask questions here to try and take you off on what they think is analogous, so they can say, look, in this analogy or this thing that I brought up, it's not the case and it's the same with Allah. But no, it's not. Now you have to go back and explain why it's not. So you want to try and avoid those if at all possible, because it's just a waste of time and doesn't actually help.
And this is an interesting question. What came first, the knowledge of Allah or the choice?
Yeah, that would be an interesting one to ask them.
There's only one thing that people can do possibly for every time. Therefore, because every other possibility, every other option, let's say, we won't say possibility because that implies it can actually happen. Every other...
we will say possibility. No. We will say possibility because that's what the definition of the word choice is.
Okay, so what's your argument that the other options are in fact real possibilities? Hamza, what's the argument for that? I guarantee I would put my house on it right now, and you all could do the same. If he could even remotely provide an argument to that question, what's the argument that the other possibilities are in fact real possibilities and not illusions? What's the argument? He'll probably say something like, well, because you got free will, right? Which is, of course, begging the question. We're not asking you already think they have free will. We're not asking you for that. But I don't think he would actually be able to provide an argument. Once he provided an argument, we could show why that's slightly untrue, but I don't think he could actually provide an argument that isn't fallacious. I could almost bet my house on it.
Possible options.
There's an issue here as well. So there's two levels of analysis.
I've noticed here now how they're all starting to dogpile, right? He's just made a ridiculous assertion that he doesn't have to back up. And now, unfortunately, Yusuf is coming in. So it's either a case at this moment in time, do you try and deal with Hamza? Ideally, you probably don't. If you want to appeal to the nuanced viewers. The viewers on the side here probably love whatever Hamza's saying. They don't really understand it any better than he does. So they've got a simplistic view. And so they'll accept whatever he says. Yeah, Hamza said something great there. What is it he said? Why do you think it's great? No, it's great. So you either choose you have to deal with that, or you go with whatever Yusuf say. But now it's a case that he didn't get to respond to Hamza, unfortunately.
I'm going to let James go at this point because I just don't think there's any point in come back. Go on, Yusuf.
No, sorry.
He's froze again, man.
Sorry. I'm back.
Yeah.
Yeah, the point is it possible for Allah's knowledge of the future to be incorrect?
No, it's
No.
not. But this is the thing.
Okay.
There's 3 levels of analysis. Now, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware of everything. And so in terms of him knowing what you did or what you're going to do, doesn't negate the fact that there were possibilities.
Okay, so he said it himself, and I think here's the key part. You need to break that down. Allah's aware of all possibilities. Okay, Yusuf, when you say Allah's aware of all possibilities, let's just unpack that for a moment. What do you mean? What would need to be the case in reality in this universe for Allah to know all possibilities? You've got to break that down, because otherwise you're never going to get down beneath this. You've got to get below the surface. These guys are very surface level, and you have to get down. What does that mean? And if he doesn't know, then say it as somewhere like I have, right? Does that mean that at the most fundamental level, as we understand it today, leptons and quarks, he would need to know their precise position and speed at every single moment, broken down to the billionth of a nanosecond or whatever the smallest timing could be at every moment in time? And if that's the case, and we are part of that, unless you think we're different, then we fall under that as well. And if you think you're different, now you have to make an argument for how we can escape what every other particle in the universe is doing at every one time, because we're made up of leptons and quarks as well. And so break those down. Otherwise, it's just going to be a surface level thing here.
The fact that you did have a choice, those things are possible.
Okay, but there he goes again. He said you did have a choice. Do you think the choice is real or is illusionary? But that's why the very first question needs to be unpacked as quickly as possible. What does it mean that Allah knows everything, knows all things? Break that down so that it becomes like you're speaking to children, so that everybody can hear what that actually means. Because at the moment, that's like in one ear and out the other. It's a conceptual idea, and we haven't made it more concrete for people to understand. And with this sort of an argument and that sort of claim, you've got to make that concrete so that people understand what the implication is, what he's actually saying.
The question is very simple. If the outcome is known, do you have a choice? If you write a test and the result is known, can you pass the test? No, you can't. So where the hell is the choice? I don't get it.
Yeah, that's why I think the time machine thing isn't a helpful analogy, because it sounds as if, because all they want to argue with the time machine is that the moment prior to the time machine having any effect, you had a choice. And that's the part that isn't in fact the case. And then they go, well, hang on a moment. Okay, if you had a choice there, the fact that you went forward and seen it doesn't mean you didn't have a choice now. And that's why I think the time machine thing isn't helpful to try and go on, because what you really have to pin them down on is that choice that you made to make the haircut wasn't actually a choice. So the fact that I went forward and saw you actually having had the haircut is irrelevant to the original point, because the point is that this omniscient being has control over every lepton, every quark. And so that decision that came into your head that you had no control over, the decision you actually made once it popped into your head, uninvited, that decision is also controlled by Allah. So you've got to try and get away from the time machine, because it's not going to help with the initial claim, which is the one we need to deal with.
It's too specific, because it's an abstract problem, and they have a problem with that. That's why they jump on this very specific analogy, because this is something that they can deal with in their brains. But they need to conceptualize even the time machine analogy before it makes any sense, and this is the problem.
Yeah, and I think the easy way, I'm just thinking as you spoke now, I think the easy way to get rid of the time machine thing is, hey, is the time machine analogous with an omniscient being that controls every lepton and every quark in the universe? No, it's not. Great. So we can dismiss the time machine. Thank you. Let's stay on Allah, right? Because any analogy, unless you say that question, I think that's the key question to just eliminate any of these analogies, because they want to make an analogy, go, look, it's the same with Allah, when of course it's not. And so just bringing it back to omniscience every single time is the way to get rid of these other analogies, because otherwise it just muddies the water and it's disanalogous. Then you have to waste time trying to unpack this, and people will get lost along the way.
And because you did make a choice, because regardless of how it looks here, it is there is I don't know, it just
I think Yusuf is confused here. Really, he's confused himself, and rightly so, right? He's desperately trying to find a way to say that all of these other choices are real choices, and it's almost like you have these 3 ice creams in front of you and you're completely uncoerced and you can select any one of them. And the implication is that if you rewound the clock, you could have chosen a different flavor of ice cream. And that's just, if Allah knows all things, then the rewinding of the clock and playing it again, you would, every single time the clock rewound and played back, it would be exactly the same. And if that happened ad infinitum, then you would have to agree that you had no choice. So maybe that's another way, as I'm just thinking about it now, to tackle this, because their implication is that you could have done something different. And maybe that's the way to ask it as well, because once if they say no to that, well, then what choice have you actually got? You would have to say that if we rewound the clock, there'd be some possibility I could have had a different choice. And if they granted that you could have had a different choice, well, then they're not talking about determinism. And then it could be that you could actually choose something that I didn't know. And so maybe that's the way to do is talk about what happens. Would you agree that if you rewind the clock and played it back, that exactly the same thing would happen? Or do you think that there would be a possibility that something else will happen? Get them to answer that question. Maybe that's another way of doing it.
And this would be a good moment to do what I love doing and what you always suggest as well, is to go and say, Yusuf, let me help you out here. Let me help you get to where you want to go. Explain it to him exactly the way that you did it now, and then start from there. This is always such a precious moment.
Yeah, and I just love the irony. Atheism makes people mentally ill. This is how it looks. Again, what's the argument for that, right? The fact that somebody doesn't understand something doesn't mean that it's false. And equally on the other side of the coin as well, obviously.
Yeah, I think it's a position you're taking. Is it hard determinism or is it soft determinism? Because in hard determinism, it'll appear like free will is an illusion. But if you're opting or you're positing soft determinism,
do you believe free will is a thing, James?
So?
Okay, so here we go again, being bombarded with questions. This is irrelevant. What is your view, guys? What my view is irrelevant. What I'm postulating is what the implications are of your view, given Allah being omniscient and you claiming to have libertarian free will. What my view is on determinism is irrelevant. What's under question here is your view. And is your view a hard deterministic view? And in fact, as far as I can remember, even hijab is a compatibilist. And if you're a compatibilist, you're granting that the initial thoughts that come into your head, you've got zero control over. The compatibilist just says that, hey, once the thought enters your mind and these options are available to you, then you have some degree of freedom over choosing which one. Even that I don't think is really the case. But I can see why somebody would want that. And we could use that for a pragmatic value, but these guys can't do that, I don't think, and not override omniscience.
I think, I'm not sure whether it is or not, but I do know that if someone has perfect knowledge exactly of the future, then there can't be free will, because we can't.
How does that negate choice? How does that negate choice?
It negates choice.
How is it that we've gone this long, right? We're almost 20 minutes gone here. We only got 10 minutes to go. You'll be glad to hear possibly that he doesn't understand why that's not a problem. James has explained it like how many times. If you rewind over this hour and 22 minutes we've been going, you will see James and I and Stops have explained this how many times. Okay, well, obviously he's not hearing us, but James has explained this multiple times. It's baffling that he still doesn't understand why this is a problem.
Choice, because it means that there are no other possibilities that you can do.
But there were possibilities.
There we go, right? He's just explained it. And now Hamza just goes, but there were other possibilities. It's like speaking to the wall. At least with the wall, you get a reflection of your own voice, which is probably preferable in the case to Hamza saying, but there were other. I'm just going to ignore what you say, and I'm just going to keep asserting my unfounded idea that there were possibilities. Why would you have a conversation with somebody like this? It is an utter waste of time.
There were possibilities, and the outcome is the outcome.
Insisting that they were possible implies that it is also possible for what God has foreseen to be different from what's actually transpired.
No, but this is what you're missing.
Why is that
it's
necessary?
possible in that moment. It's possible in that moment. Once it's been done, it's been done. And so,
it's like, it's headbangingly frustrating that they just don't get this. But they are so committed to not getting it. Now, there are other theological positions, right? There are people that just bite the bullet and go, yes, we don't have free will. I think it's the what do you call them? The Calvinists, the Christian Calvinists just bite the bullet on free will and go, no, we don't have free will. There is determinism, right? That has very unpleasant implications. These guys are trying to have their cake and eat it. Some people even think that God is not omniscient. He can see all possibilities, but he doesn't know which one you're going to select. That's probably the best option that you could select is, in my view, that's the best option you could have. Then you have to give up transcendence or omniscience. But I think, you've got to bite some bullet if you're going to be intellectually honest. And what they're trying to do is just a non-starter. So that would be the option I would go with if I was a theist and go, okay, he's not omniscient in that he knows every possibility, the possibility I'm going to take, but he knows every conceivable possibility I could take, just not the one I'm going to take. And that's at least more of coherent to me.
Mm. And so again, I'm going to quote my doctor brother, mashallah. It doesn't happen because it's written. It's written because it happened. A
distinction, and like I've said before, it's a distinction without a difference. Maybe that truism sounds good to your ear, but there's no, in my mind, unless you provide an argument, in my mind, that's those two mean exactly the same thing. It sounds good to you, but there's no difference.
And we know this because Allah tells us that we can make dua to change our state of circumstances, which raise our low our rizq.
But he's just eluding you. You can't do that. When he says that, he's giving you the illusion that you can make that change. That change is, or no change has already happened or will happen in a certain way. He's just giving you an illusion to make you feel better. That's what's going on. And they will never accept that. Even if you walk them through this, but I think maybe there are ex-Muslims who understand. Maybe there's even theists who do understand this. Like I say, the Calvinists understand this, and they could explain it to these guys, right? And they believe in a God.
Yeah, but instantly you need to ask, so that means God does not know everything. Is that what you're saying? That's
no, he knows everything, but hey, you can still have free will. They just keep repeating the same thing, not realizing the contradiction here, and not providing an argument that gets them out of this. And this idea that, hey, if he's not forcing you, if he knows all things, well, he's not forcing you. I just think is fallacious anyway.
It isn't fixed. Yeah, we can affect our present through our decisions, through our choices, through our actions, through our work. Yeah, the point is this: once it's over, it's over. So, for example, once you're dead, and all your decisions have been made, and all your decisions have been seen and have been counted and will be judged against. And as far as we're concerned, we're all dead.
Hasn't.
Great. That's wonderful to know. We're all dead. Thank goodness we don't believe what you believe. But all of this is just vacuous rambling. It doesn't, this is just assertions. He really, really believes this, but he can't provide an argument. So he'll just repeat it over and over, because this is what happens with people that don't have arguments. They just repeat things in similar or slightly different words, and it's just an assertion. Once you see it once you get used to it, because I just hear this from people a lot. I just hear them repeating the same thing in slightly different words as if they've given a reason. They've just repeated the claim. And I learned this from people who are much smarter than me. And because sometimes I go, okay, that's an answer. And the other guy would go, no, you're just repeating the claim. And he would spell out what the claim was. And then you hear what they said was in fact just a reword of the original claim. They didn't actually argue for it. They just reworded it. And now I'm a bit more used to how that works.
But come on, how do you get through to a brain like this, which is so thoroughly contaminated with the Islam virus, that all rational, logical, and critical thinking is completely gone? How do you handle this? I mean, I commend James sitting here, that he's totally like Zen-like, like totally calm. I would be hopping up and down in my chair and saying, listen, you oaf, why don't you get it? I've just explained it to you 50 million times. How many more times do I need to explain it? What needs to happen so that you understand that if you take an action where the outcome is known, you do not have a choice? What more does it take to give this information to you?
I think that would be a terrible question to ask him, because he would have no clue, and he would just say there is no way. So there's nothing you could ask him to tell you how to better explain to him that he's mistaken. That just, with somebody like that, no. With more nuanced people, you could ask, okay, how could I better explain this? And they might be able to give you away. He wouldn't be able to do that at all. That would be on deaf ears. He'd repeat his claim.
Yusuf, can you tell me what I can tell Hamza so that he understands the problem? Maybe this way around.
Not going to help either. No, I don't think anybody could do that for him.
From beginning to end. He's seen every decision and choice we've made. Now, if you want to argue there's no free will, then you've got to be able to let all the prisoners out of prison, because none of them had a choice in what they did.
Oh, dear. Okay, we go to prison. Again, this is just a red herring, right? Now he's going to this, because all we're talking about is whether they have, this is where you've got to be, it's difficult to do, it's easy for us because we're slowing this down and we're unpacking it as it happens here. And you've got to make a split-second decision. Do you go down that path, or do you just ignore it? Now, what Pine Creek does, he doesn't get sidetracked with these sort of things. And that's one way to do it. You might want to, like we are, deal with every single point. But if you do that, A, it stretches out the time. B, your original argument then gets watered down and lost in translation. And so it's a case of, do you go with this now or not? And we'll comment more on this because it's going to come up a bit more about this idea on prison. And so it stops unless you want to say something now, because it's going to be repeated for a couple of times. So we'll break it down a bit later on.
Well, I don't think that Islam is true. If Islam were true, then it wouldn't make sense for me to believe.
No. If you don't believe in free will, then you should say prisoners are just victims of circumstance and we should let them out because it's not their fault. They had no choice in what they did. If you're not saying that, then you do believe we have free will.
Well, the reason why that's not quite correct is because even if someone wasn't responsible for what they did and had no choice but to do that thing because they didn't have free will, it would still make sense to lock people up for the safety.
Why would they?
Okay, James is going to explain this. This is really good. James did a great job here of explaining this, right? And the fact that Farouk laughs here again, it just tells us a lot about you got to notice with reactions like this. And this is practice. It takes time, etc. But notice like who you're not going to waste time with. The reason why you'd lock somebody up, and here's the analogy, and I think actually James does make this later on, so maybe I'm preempting it. I don't remember. But just think about it. If you have somebody who is mentally, had some brain aneurysm, and we see this, right? There's lots of them, unfortunately, especially in the Western world and probably everywhere else as well. They might not get the care that they should in other cases, or they might not be identified. But if somebody's schizophrenic or has some other disorder, and they couldn't have done otherwise because they have something going on in their brain, we are not going to hold them culpable in the sense that they are going to be punished in the sense that we hold them accountable because they could have, in some sense done otherwise. What we do is take them off the street, which is exactly what James is going to say, because they're a danger to themselves and to other people. Even though they couldn't have done otherwise, we're still going to protect society from them. That's all we need to do. They don't have to have free will. And any rational person will go, okay, if that were the case, if you had a robot that was going around slapping people, that couldn't have done otherwise because it was programmed, you're not going to punish the robot, but you're still going to, in a sense, you're going to punish it, but it's not in the sense that it had, that it was culpable, but you're still going to, and it's the same with animals, right? It's not a case that you sentence a bear to 50 years in prison if it kills somebody, but you are going to do something, or crocodiles, because I saw one of those recently that ate like 50 villages over a period of 10 years in some place out in, I don't know if it was India or wherever it was, but you're not going to lock it up because it's culpable of, it knew that it was doing something wrong. It's mostly because it's a danger to society. It's exactly the same here. Those people, even if they didn't have a choice, they should still be locked away because they're a danger to themselves and others. Very simple. And I'm sure James will say that now.
Listen. I said the answer just then. It would make sense for the sake of the safety of the rest of society. Okay.
So you're still holding them accountable for something that they had no control over.
Like, these guys just don't understand, right? It was so simple. He's just explained it. I think he might try and explain it again now. So let me not jump in too quick.
No, nothing.
You're right. You should treat them as victims, but you should still lock them up to
So should you punish them?
Society.
Or should you give them an Xbox?
Well,
Survival.
Well, if it were the case that, let's say someone,
that would be.
okay, here's a good example. Let's say someone is mad, right? And so we consider mad people to be not responsible in the same way as regular sane people.
Okay.
And so if a mad person commits murder, we don't like sort of go, oh, you horrible person, how dare you, we're going to do this to punish you. We say, well, we appreciate that you weren't in control of yourself and you have diminished responsibility, but we still need to lock you up for the safety of society.
That's fine.
Okay, so he just admitted that that's fine. That's exactly the same thing. Now take that to the people who don't have a choice, because all this is about is whether you had a free choice. And if the mad person didn't have a free choice, which he's agreed with, then it makes sense that if people are, don't have a choice, they would be locked up exactly as if they were mad. It's just that they didn't have a choice to do otherwise. So he's agreed, but watch him now try and somehow argue the point.
Case. Right. So
that's different, isn't it? Because they've got no accountability.
Exactly.
It's different, isn't it? Because they have no accountability. In the view that you are determined, you don't have accountability anyway, because you couldn't have done otherwise. So in that sense, it's exactly the same as the person who's mad.
The person is not choosing to do this stuff. It's got the mental faculty.
Right. And so if it's impossible for any human being to do other than what Allah has foreseen, then every human being, hasn't made a choice either. because
That's what
James,
it's logically that's rubbish.
James,
The irony that he says it's rubbish, but it's exactly analogous.
His point.
Isn't this fascinating, right? Isn't it fascinating that he can just say it's rubbish, but he agreed with it a moment ago that you would lock mad people up. And James is saying, well, okay, if it's the case that, you know, that there's no free will, then we'd lock people up if they did the same thing as the mad people, because they're not responsible, because they're just doing whatever is going on. They don't have a choice to do otherwise. And now they suddenly want to argue the point. It's just like, I think it's something you said, Stops. They just don't get, the penny just will not drop here for these guys.
James,
It's
I
just garbage,
already,
mate.
I already ended this with the future.
Honestly,
If you think,
it's repeating.
so that was the end. That was it, bro. Look, just because you know something because of your knowledge doesn't mean you force it. This is your
Yes, it does if you're omniscient. That's the only thing we need to come back to. It is the case if you're omniscient. Farouk, let me ask you this. What does omniscient mean? Right? He thinks he's got a knockdown argument. And this just shows you, right? I see it sometimes posted online by people as well, the Dunning-Kruger effect. I don't know if anybody could grab an image. Stops, if you can grab one of these images with the you know, the X and Y axis and what the Dunning-Kruger effect looks like. And he is on the very far left-hand side, if I could put it that way. I'd love to, if maybe I'll get it at the end if you guys can't find it. But just type in, Google in Dunning-Kruger graph, and you'll get this graph that looks like a half circle, and it goes up very high with ignorance at the very beginning. Then it slowly curves down to don't know anything, and then it slowly curves back up as you become more and more knowledgeable. Say, okay, I know more things. It's an interesting-looking graph, and it sort of represents the Dunning-Kruger effect.
misconception. This is your lack of understanding of what it means to have a choice.
The lack of understanding of what it means, says this guy who doesn't understand this argument at all. The irony here is just so palpable. It's it's just amazing. The person who doesn't understand saying somebody else doesn't understand. How often do you see this happen? It's fascinating, right?
I'm going to let you go at this point.
No, Hamza, bring it back.
He's frozen again.
Wait, could you start again with man?
So I talk of ice cream.
I just have a question, James, right? Because you know how sequential logic works, right? And I have to agree with Yusuf that your third premise does not make sense to me. Because it seems to entail something that isn't explained anywhere else, right? In your third premise, you say, therefore, at every point in time, there is only one thing you can possibly do, which is the thing that Allah has foreseen. If you did something different at that point in time, then Allah's knowledge will be fallible. So at every point in time, there is only one thing you can possibly do, and you have to do that one thing. But again, our point here is that you only do that thing because you've chosen to do it.
Yeah.
But just repeating your claim, there we go. Stops. That's kind of that's the idea, right? That's one version of it. There's a lovely example of the Dunning-Kruger effect, and we're all subject to that at some point, and in different ideas. But that beginning part where you know nothing and you think that you know a lot, right? The high degree of confidence is the y-axis, the one that goes up to the top there. The higher the confidence in this graph, the less you know as on the bottom side there, and the guru becomes kind of recognized as you move along. So it's a wonderful example there of Farouk's ability in this
peak
particular
of Mount
argument,
Stupid.
right?
That's exactly it. So this is a very good description, I thought.
Yes, yeah, and that's
then you
that's
realize
an example
it,
that
and you go into the valley of despair, and that's when you realize, oh shit, I don't know anything. I need to actually do the work. And then you go through the slope of enlightenment where you really go and learn what this stuff is all about. And then you get to the plateau of sustainability where you actually get to a confidence level and knowledge at the same time.
And you'll notice, right, with gurus and experts in the field, they'll couch their language, say, yeah, this is likely the case, or we're not too sure here. Why do they say that? Because they're in possession of so much information, and they're aware of so many different factors that the rest of us aren't, and especially the ignoramuses, that they're much more couched in their language. And that comes across to the layperson who's very much on the know-nothing side. Well, these guys are not sure. But actually, there's a reason why they're not sure, because there's all this information. They have to try and process all of this. When you don't have any of that in your mind, then it seems to be much easier. But in fact, it's out of utter ignorance. And that's the difference, right? It's just a fascinating, effect this is. And we just see it, especially in this stream, but regularly, just in life in general. People who think that they, have a high level of confidence, but actually know nothing, because you can hear it when they open their mouth. Okay, if we go back to the video, there stops. There we go.
This reality, just to be clear here, right? This reality that we live in, right, is a reality allowed by Allah, right? So Allah is not forcing my hand to make these statements to you or otherwise, but Allah has allowed me to make those choices. His foreknowledge does not inhibit free will, and this is what I don't understand between premise 2.
Okay, so this is if we had Jack Angstreicher, we had some of the other atheist guys on here. That's just a claim. What we're looking for is an argument to show that that's the case. At the moment, what you notice here, if you rewind this, if you look at it again, they just keep repeating the claim. They use their own words, but essentially they're all saying the same thing. Allah's all-knowingness or omniscience doesn't entail that you don't have free will. He's not forcing you. That's kind of the same claim that these guys are trying to do. And the way they attempt to argue very poorly on one or two occasions is to bring up disanalogies. And so you've got to get rid of those disanalogies. Once you've got rid of the disanalogies, there's actually nothing else there. Then disanalogies are bad in and of themselves, and they don't provide a good argument anyway. But once you can sidestep those, then there's nothing else here except them repeating the claim over and over and over.
Between premise 3 and premise 4, how does it follow that our choice is as a consequence of God's foreknowledge only?
So let me think about that for just a moment. I'll try and understand your point and do you justice.
What are you thinking? Let me just read.
Okay, this is a bad thing. While you're thinking, let me do something else so I can interrupt your thinking. And he's not doing it on purpose. So this is not a dig at Yusuf per se, but it is a case of like jumping in. Hang on, Yusuf. Let me answer this question because you're going to bring something else up here. My attention is now going to be drawn to you. So should we just carry on? Or do you want me to have a thoughtful moment here so that I can respond to Ijaz? Because they're all looking for the gap so they can jump in to say something else, and it's unhelpful here. So now James is like, what do I do now, right?
Just read that thing again. So therefore, at every moment or every point in time, there is only one thing you can possibly do. But that's, like I said at the beginning, that's not true.
Yeah.
There is a moment in time where there are multiple possibilities, and then you pick one.
Okay, so the question to him is, how did you establish that those multiple possibilities are in fact real and not illusionary? How did you establish that? What's the argument that those are real possibilities and there is some possibility you could have chosen them? So let me ask you, Yusuf, if you think those are possibilities, is it possible you could have chosen one of those other possibilities? The answer is either yes or no. There isn't, I don't know. There's either a yes or no to that question as far as we can tell. Either you can or you can't choose that possibility. So if you say the word possibility, you have to then back it up and agree that it's possible you could choose that. And if you could choose that and Allah knew you were going to do something different, then you've done something that he didn't know about. Is that the claim you want to make?
And then you say, which is the thing that Allah has foreseen. Allah has foreseen that you had multiple choices and then you picked one. Okay. That's what Allah sees.
He knows the outcome of every potential choice you make.
Jazz, would it be okay if we maybe used a concrete example, like, for instance, buying ice cream tomorrow, something like that? Are you still there, Jazz?
Yeah, before you move to that example, I just want to find out what is your understanding of time here? Because for us, Allah exists outside, as in Allah is not created within time. He has existed before time. Time is a creation in and of itself. So because he exists outside of time and he's the creator of time, this means that we exist within time. So we find out about our choices as we make them in real time, whereas God has already known what those choices would be because he does not exist in time.
Okay, so how's that helpful? This doesn't help you.
What does that do?
Exactly. Yeah, there's no distinction. It doesn't matter about this. Ijaz, regardless, are you saying that if there's one conception of time versus another, somehow that has an impact on what Allah knows or how we're going to respond? If there is no difference, then why are you bringing this up? If there is a difference, tell me what the difference is and we can talk about that. But I don't see anything that makes this relevant to the discussion here.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like a red herring. Does it matter? And if he says, yes, it matters, tell me how it matters. And then I can tell you. But if it doesn't matter, then it's pointless bringing it up.
He's not limited by time. How does that distinction between Allah's experience of time and our experience of time as creation factor into your logic here? Like that's what's bothering me here.
Okay, so the question is, rather than answer that, ask a question back. Why is that bothering you? I don't see a distinction between this. So why is this bothering? What is it that's giving you some bother there? Ask the question back to him here at this point, because I don't see it unless James thinks that there is a problem. Ask him what the problem is, because otherwise he's going, I see a problem, but he's not explaining what the actual problem is for James to actually answer. So rather throw the question back at him. I don't see a problem. Ijaz, you said there's a problem. What is the problem?
Okay, so it seems, as far as I can see it, I think either possibility kind of, or either way of God experiencing time, doesn't make a difference to the rest of the argument. And so in one case, it would be, let's suppose God exists outside of time, and quote unquote before time was even a concept. God still knew exactly every single thing that his creation is, every single thing that's going to happen in his creation. If that's the case, then I think the argument still holds. On the other hand, if God kind of exists in time but still has infallible knowledge of the future, then I think that the argument still holds there as well. So.
Okay, so I don't know why he's brought this up. Think about it as sides of a coin. Example, someone would attain riches in a right or haram way. This is free will. Allah is aware of all possibilities. How's that in any way helpful here? It's not doing anything. If the coin, you could use the coin as an example. If Allah knows that at 10:53 a.m. in the morning, you're going to flip a coin only once and it's going to be heads, is there any possibility it could be tails? Or in that case, could you bet everything that you could possibly get your hands on that is going to be heads? I think the answer, it answers itself.
Because at this point now, the problem occurs where, Allah knows our potential choices, but by saying that Allah exists within time, then it would mean he is finding out as it happens. Your concept of God.
No, it doesn't mean that at all. Where are you getting that idea from? If he's in time, he can move anywhere in time anyway. It's not as if James is saying he's in this moment and he's sort of trapped in this moment. That's not the case. He could move anywhere sequentially, or he could have a helicopter view and looking down and experiences every moment simultaneously. But as James pointed out, I don't see any reason, unless they providing an argument, that this makes any difference to what somebody is going to do.
God. So let's be clear here. Your understanding of your concept of God seems to assume that he doesn't. Sorry, your understanding of your own concept of God seems to entail that God can't have all knowledge of all things. And I feel like that is one of the problems. And the second problem from that is you see.
Okay, but James has explained that it doesn't matter in his view which version of time you want to take. He doesn't think, and I agree with him, that it has any effect. So why are you bringing this up? At no point is he saying that God doesn't have we are going along with the idea that God knows all things in every scenario. He knows all things, whether he's in time or out of time. He knows all things. He knows every state of affairs at every minuscule moment of time, from the beginning of the universe until its end. Whichever way you look at it, whether he zooms up and down like it is on a racetrack, or whether he goes up and he looks down at every single moment on the racetrack, it makes no difference. So why is it that he does this? They're not paying attention or listening to what James is saying. He says it doesn't matter.
You seem to assume that if we have knowledge of our own choices, that Allah should not have knowledge of those choices. And if he does have knowledge of those choices, it means that we could not have made those choices. So the argument in some parts seems to be slightly...
Yes, the second part is exactly what James has said. If he knows it, then we can't make those choices. Those choices are illusory. The second part is correct, not the first part. At no point has James said or alluded to the fact that God isn't omniscient. You guys would have to make an argument, right? You'd have to say that free will is the case, and you'd have to give up omniscience. You want to have omniscience and free will, and you just can't have both.
Slightly circular. You have to assume that Allah can't have knowledge in order for us to have knowledge. And if he does have knowledge, then we can't have knowledge. Why do you entail the denial of that claim in the same step that you accepted?
Can you explain to me?
Sorry, Stops, you wanted to say something?
That's not, none of what Egypt has said is something that corresponds with what James has said. None of it.
No, he's making assumptions here that just isn't the case.
A little more, what knowledge I'm implying that God doesn't have.
Are we going to continue with this, or are we done?
Why is this guy even here? He should just blank out, go and have some tea, coffee, come back in a little while, let somebody else run the show here. It's just painful to hear him pipe up at any point here.
Yeah, but Rob,
potential choices. Potential choices.
There's a real problem here, because in the beginning, James was very clear and said, Yusuf, I would like to speak to you. I would like to hear your opinion on this. But everybody else is jumping in with really ridiculous and okay, I'm not going to, with nonsensical stuff. And Yusuf only said, I think, 2 or 3 things. But he just asked some questions, and then it got sidetracked. So the only one person that I would be interested in hearing something from would be this Yusuf guy, and he's the only one who keeps quiet all the time. The others who have nothing to contribute, they are the ones who are constantly talking, giving some inane nonsense.
Yeah, it is fascinating how the people that are least knowledgeable on the subject have got the most to say. And when they open their mouth, you can see that they have got nothing of substance to say. But that's why the Dunning-Kruger effect is so effective. And we're seeing it playing out here for all to see.
He says that's
I think
it.
we're done. I think we're done, James. James, I think you got your answer. Not just you, James. Anyone else watching who had this concept
Okay, we're
about
at
free
the
will,
end
I think
now.
you've heard the explanation from Hashim, from Yusuf, from Uthman, from myself, and Brother Ijaz. James is never going to accept it. We know that.
No, I want to understand Ijaz's question.
We look
I'm
forward to
trying
your
to-
nonsense
you
claim.
Ijaz, can we talk about this another time if Hamza doesn't want
Yeah,
to? What's your sort of
just email Hamza's then Dawah and they'll put you in contact with him.
All right.
Okay. I'm sorry we couldn't
James,
explore this.
last very simple
Okay, the last thing I'm going to say is I'm going to repeat my claim over again and then feel like I can pat myself on the back and I've dealt with this. Watch this.
thing. Just take this away, okay? You have choices. Allah is just that great that He knows what choices you make, but He doesn't force the choices on you. Done.
Yeah, that's nonsense. What's the argument for that? That's what you guys have asserted. I provided an argument that counters that. You've not provided an argument that rebuts me. So no, I don't accept that. That's utter nonsense. Thanks for playing.
See ya.
And last one, do you have a mirror in your house? Take care, dude.
What is that?
And
Do
they
you have a
don't get
mirror
it.
in your house?
They
This should tell us
don't
everything
get
about
it.
this guy. That's the end of it there. I'll stop sharing and we can give closing thoughts here. That should tell us a lot about dealing with this guy. That's why I said I'm happy to go on one of these streams, but I just don't want to interact with this guy. It's a complete and utter waste of time. Every time he opens his mouth, there's nothing useful to say, and then you get a parting comment like that. But I actually like that in a sense because it tells me exactly what this other person is thinking. This guy has got low down morals. The fact that he has to have an ad hominem against James, we can deal with it, but it reflects on him, and that's all we need to see. Why would one waste our time? Because he's loud and brash. He's on the very far left-hand side of the Dunning-Kruger effect. And unfortunately, most of his viewers are there as well. So they all line up together. But then the nuanced people aren't like that, but they aren't also brave enough to put him in his place. And, you can see the laughing going on here for everybody. Maybe Yusuf is busy with something else here. He just sat out of it. It's a shame that I've invited him. Maybe somebody else can. See if we can reach out, James, to him. We'll do it on this channel or wherever you like. Even he and James can do it. I'll just moderate or whatever. They can just do it on my channel. Or he's got his own channel. Maybe Ijaz, but I don't think the other guys are of any value then. The fact that they're laughing or that they think they can make these assertions as if this is an argument. They don't know the difference between an argument and an assertion. James did a masterclass in showing what an argument is, a set of premises that leads to a conclusion. Now, that's not always easy for people to do, but you can generally get there informally anyway. Hey, here's what I believe. Here's why I believe it. That's an informal version of an argument. And then people can challenge it, either the validity or the soundness of the argument. So overall, I think James did as good a job as he could do here. I think to focus maybe on something like using a Darren Brown analogy, ask them about what would happen if you rewound the clock. That's another way to do it. It's like, what examples can we come up with together that can maybe scratch this record? Because otherwise they're just going to repeat this thing. We've got to make sure that we torpedo any of the analogies as quickly as possible and show that they're disanalogous so we don't have to waste time on them and just stick on the omniscience, because anything else is a red herring. And I think that's kind of me. Your thoughts, Stops?
No, it's very similar. The only thing that I would add here is that for me, it's incredibly frustrating to know that if one of us were to go on there now and say, listen, I would like to talk about free will, they would all groan and say, yeah, but we handled that. We dealt with it. We answered that. The fact that they did not, the fact that they just brought out some ridiculous gibberish, and their perception is that they answered it, they said something about it, and now in their minds, this is a settled issue. So there is no point in bringing this up again because it has been dealt with. And this for me is incredibly frustrating because for them, it's patting themselves on the back. Yeah, we've answered, and we are still in our own echo chamber, and the four of us or the five of us have actually managed to fight off the claims of an atheist. And that is incredibly frustrating for me when I see that they have done nothing of the kind, nothing of the sort, nothing at all that is intellectually stimulating or satisfying in any way. And they are going on and patting themselves on the back. So I find that incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, That's the sad part, right? They don't know what an argument is. There's better interlocutors. There's the Discord server. We might pop on there at least. You can have conversations there with us at some point. I'll post it here. If you're not part of the server, join up. We're not always on there, but you can always post messages, and we do sort of take a look most days. And some of the other guys like TDS Dave are thinking clearly, Smile, if you like. These guys are on there as well. So there's always text conversations, if not voice conversations. So on that note, as always, thank you very much, Stops, for joining me. I hope everybody found it entertaining, educational, whatever the case may be. And I'm sure we'll be back with another one at some future time when Stops and I can arrange it. On that note, I bid you all good night, and take care and look after yourselves.
Good night. Ciao for now. See you.